Welcome, history fans. Welcome to module number 6. Lecture over Jacksonian America. Again, remember those learning objective questions. We'll be talking about the shift in working culture. We'll be talking about the transportation revolution and the market revolution. And then we'll end up by talking about some justifications of manifest destiny, which is also happening. So the Jacksonian era, think about this as like the 1830s decade, 1830s, 1840s. That's the time period which we're talking about. So first, the transportation revolution. We've got some fun, pretty maps here. And all these maps are telling us is that in 1800, travel time is very, very long. Looking at travel time from New York City, for example, these red areas, it takes a long time to get anywhere, day after day after day. We can see on the key here. In 1800, travel time is long, but that shifts dramatically by the 1830s decade. You can go a lot further in one day than you in 1830 than you could in 1800. It's basically what this map is saying. You can go a lot further, and so this is because of what we as historians and emerging historians call internal improvements. Internal improvements. That's your phrase for the day, internal improvements. So some examples of internal improvements would be things like better roads or turnpikes. Better roads and turnpikes. We have turnpikes today, right? A turnpike is where you pay to use that road. Originally, you're driving your little wagon or you're riding your little horse and you come up to a toll booth and you pay your fare, and there's a pike, a pole across the road, and the pole man will turn the pike and let you pass, and after you pay your toll, and then he'll turn the pike back. And so this is why they're called turnpikes. That's where that comes from. So better roads and turnpikes. The steamboat is invented by our friend Robert Fulton, and so not only can boats move down river with the current, but they can also move upriver against the current. And so this opens up whole new markets for people. New products can get to places where they couldn't before. Much easier, much faster, much cheaper. So steamboats, very important. While we're thinking about waterways, canals are very important. Particularly the Erie Canal. This is probably the most famous. And the Erie Canal moves from, of course, Lake Erie down Hudson River to New York. So some statistics here for you. The Erie Canal finished in 1825. It's 336 miles long. 336 miles long. Remember, this is before modern machinery. They're not out there with skid steers and dump trucks, right? Okay, they're out there with shovels and picks and wheelbarrows. And they dig a 363-mile long canal connecting Lake Erie with the Hudson in New York. And this is a drastic improvement. Before the canal is completed, travel time from New York City to Buffalo was 20 days. After the Erie Canal is completed, it's 6 days. Cost of shipping goods is cut drastically as well. It used to cost $100 per ton to ship something. Now it costs $15 per ton to ship something. So $100 to $15, 20 days to 16. We can see that now, after the transportation revolution, America is a very mobile nation. America is a very urban nation because all of these new improvements start creating cities. The railroads, for example, a capitalist venture. It's the first big business. Railroads don't have as much weather problems as other modes of transportation do. So they're faster, they're easier, they're cheaper. People can get places to where before they couldn't. And new towns are created all along the canal, all along the railroad line. America is becoming a mobile nation. it's becoming an urban nation, and it's also leading to changes in the economy. Now, because of those canals and those railroads or what have you, it's so much easier for people to ship things. This leads to a shift in the market. No longer is America a farming nation. Now it's an industrial nation. No longer do farmers and individual families just have to worry about subsisting. Now people are focused on economic abundance. It's all about making money. The transportation revolution directly leads to the market revolution. The two are linked, inherently linked. The transportation revolution leads directly to the market revolution. No longer is America an agricultural nation. Now it's an industrial, urban nation focused on markets. Now the market revolution has a lot of important influences on the way that people live their lives. So first let's talk about men. Changes in working man culture. Previously, before the market revolution, there was a procedure that craftsmen went through to learn a trade. So let's say you're a young man and you want to be a cobbler, right? You're going to make shoes for a living. That's important. Everyone needs shoes. So the first thing as a young boy you would do is you would apprentice yourself to a master artisan. You would find someone who made shoes for a living. That was their trade. They were a master cobbler. And you would become an apprentice. An apprentice lives with the master artisan. He receives food and clothing and lodging. And in return, the master artisan benefits from his labor. He teaches that apprentice how to make shoes or whatever. And the apprentice works for him in his shoe shop. After several years of being an apprentice, then those young men would go on to become a journeyman. Maybe you would take a journey to the next town over and you would apprentice yourself to a new master artisan or a series of master artisans. And you would learn from them and you would maybe work up a client base of your own. And at the end goal is becoming a master artisan yourself, having enough money saved up to buy and establish your own shop where you could make shoes for yourself. You are your own boss. And in return, you are expected to take on the next generation of cobblers as apprentices. So this was a pretty good system, a very logical system, but this breaks down in the 1830s. In the 1830s, all of those new internal improvements that mean new cities mean factories as well. All of those canals, hydropower, the water turns the water wheel, and they create factories. The steam engine allows people to create factories, new sources of power, new ways to run machinery. And so machines start to proliferate. There are more machines. There are more factories. And so now no longer do people make shoes by hand, but it's pushing a button. It's pulling a lever. It's running a machine. Now anybody can run a machine. It doesn't take very long to learn how to run a machine. Anybody can pull a lever. Anybody can move a shuttle through a loom. So now there's no need for you to become an apprentice and then to become a journeyman and spend years and years of your life learning a trade. So people don't do that anymore. That system of apprentice to journeyman to master artisan breaks down. And after that system is gone, men start to view liberty differently. Men start to view liberty differently. Masters stop having apprentices live with them, so they lose control. The masters become a separate class. The masters start to think of themselves as inherently different from the people who are working in their factory. The factory owners are a different class, a wealthier class than their workers. Masters, the former masters, the factory owners, are interested in protecting the good of the Commonwealth, the good of the country. So they don't like it when workers go on strike, for example, because they see strikes as being very selfish. Strikes halt creation of goods, and therefore the economy is inhibited. The economy isn't moving forward. The economy isn't progressing. Nobody's making any money. They don't necessarily care about worker welfare, whether workers are safe, well paid. They care about the economy at large. On the other hand, workers have a very different view of liberty. They're not really concerned with the economy writ large, liberty writ large. What they're concerned about is making one group of people, themselves, defer to another group of people. They see this as inherently illogical to a democratic society. One group of people, the factory owners, shouldn't be able to boss around, shouldn't be able to take advantage of another group, the workers. So it threatens the ideas, democratic ideas of the republic, little r. The market revolution also causes changes in women's work, changes in women's roles. Now, previously, on the farm, when America was a farming society, men and women both worked at home. They're doing the same kinds of things, and so men see women doing that, and so their activities are recognized as work. After the market revolution, men leave home to go to work in a factory. They go to work in a factory, or they go to work as a clerk, or maybe they're a merchant, maybe they're a sailor. Work no longer happens in the home, in other words. When men leave work and come home, at the end of the day, home is where leisure happens. So men start to equate leaving home with work and coming home with leisure and downtime. Women have to stay at home. Women are allowed to go out and get a job in a factory or become a clerk or do anything else. And so this leads to the idea of separate spheres. Separate spheres. Men, on the one hand, work in the public sphere. They're in work. They're in factories. They engage in business or in politics or in war. That all happens in the public sphere. The private sphere, or the domestic sphere, is the home, and that's where women are supposed to be. Women's work is less visible, and that makes it ignored. Now, we know that women are still doing work at the home, right? We can see that in this picture. Here's a woman cooking. Here's a woman spinning thread so she can make cloth. So spinning, carding the wool, spinning the wool to make the thread, weaving the wool thread to make the blanket, cutting and sewing the wool fabric to make the clothes. Like that's all work. Planting the food, canning the food, cooking the food, and serving the food, that's all work. But men start to equate things that happen at home as leisure, and it's not work anymore to them. So women's work is ignored. Women's work becomes invisible. So some changes in women's and men's activities because of the market revolution. So let's shift gears here. The other big thing that happens in the Jacksonian era. The first big thing that happens in the Jacksonian era is the transportation and market revolutions. The other big event is Manifest Destiny, and we'll talk about Manifest Destiny a lot when we talk about our primary documents. Manifest in our image, especially, I guess, the image. So we saw that image about John Gast's American Progress, how the message of that image was bringing civilization to the wilderness. That is a good way to sum up Manifest Destiny, bringing civilization to the wilderness. Now, so then the question becomes why? Why do they care? Why do white Americans want to bring civilization to the wilderness? Why bother going into the interior of the continent? Well, it's all because of these three things. These are their three justifications of Manifest Destiny. First, and by far the most important, is predestination. Predestination. the idea that it is Americans' God-given right to own all that land. It is their God-given right to move into the interior of the continent and take that land and spread civilization, spread America's version of liberty. They are destined to do it. Predestination, get it? Second idea, that of geographical proximity. This idea that it's there and it's so close, so we might as well take it. It's there and it's so close, so we might as well take it. And this really comes into play when we're thinking about California, especially when we're thinking about San Francisco. San Francisco, particularly, and California more generally, is very attractive to white Americans because of trade. It's an economic reason. So geographical proximity also tied to economics. Being bi-coastal, having a bi-coastal country is better for trade. You don't have to take so long to travel all the way from the eastern seaboard all the way down around South America over to Asia. Now you can just go in a straight line. So being bi-coastal is much better for commerce. They really like San Francisco because it's a perfect port. It's perfect. It's a natural port. It's already there. They don't have to build it. They don't have to do any infrastructure work. It's a warm water port, so it never freezes over. It can run all year long. And third, it's a very deep port. It's one of the deepest ports in the world. So it can get in any sort of ship. Any sort of ship can come in or go out from San Francisco Harbor. Natural port, warm water port, a very deep port. San Francisco is important if we're thinking about economics. They need to get to San Francisco so they can benefit economically from that. Our third justification of manifest destiny, simple racism. Racism and the use of soil, kind of the same thing. White Americans look at the West, what we would think of as the American West, and see a bunch of brown people that aren't using the land correctly, aren't using the land well in their view. So who's there, right? Native Americans and Mexicans. And there's a lot of ethnic and racial prejudice against those people. We've talked before about how white Americans tend to view Native Americans as barbarians and savage. And those Native Americans are nomadic, particularly on the plains, in the plains area. They're nomadic. They don't have settled communities. They don't have settled farms. White Americans see this and it blows their minds. They don't understand. They don't think that those Native Americans are using that land correctly. If they're just passing by, then somebody else who has more brains can stay there and use that land and build a farm because the Native Americans aren't using it. On the other hand, Mexicans. The Mexicans don't use the land correctly because even though they're farmers, they're very lazy, apparently. They're very lazy and they're drunks. So white Americans, as they move into what we would think of as the southwestern United States, present-day southwestern United States, places like New Mexico or Arizona, what are those places like? What's their climate? It's hot. It's a desert. You don't want to go out in the middle of the day and work up a sweat when it's 1,000 degrees outside in the shade. So what do Mexicans do at noon when the sun's at its highest point? They go home, they have lunch, they take a siesta, they take a nap. And this makes a lot of sense for them, for their culture, for the climate in which they live. But white Americans come there, they see a bunch of Mexicans working, or not working, and they say, man, you're wasting daylight. What are you doing? Why are you being so lazy? Go to work. Mexicans are also Catholic, which white Americans don't like, but there's a lot of feast days in the Catholic calendar. There's a lot of holidays, and whenever there's a holidays, what do? You have a party, and if you're having a party, what do? You drink a lot. Catholics tend to like wine. It's a thing. And so a lot of Mexicans are viewed by white Americans as being lazy and as being drunk, and they don't work when they should. They're not using that land correctly. And if they're not using that land there's no reason why white Americans shouldn't have that land. So we'll talk later when we talk about our primary documents about how manifest destiny plays out in the real world. For some people, it benefits them, white Americans, but for basically everybody else, it is a problem. So think of that as you work through the rest of the module, and I'll see you later.